Welcome to Take a Wander with Shebs. Welcome back on the podcast Karen Gershowitz, who's going to be discussing with me her new book, Wanderlust, Extraordinary People, Quirky Places, and Curious Cuisine.
Karen, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you on. It's been a couple of years since we last spoke. How are you?
I'm doing great. Been doing a lot of traveling, and so I'm happy because as with you, not traveling is a real issue for me. So I'm making up for lost time.
You have, as I said, been on before, and you spoke about your last book, which was Travel Mania: Stories of Wanderlust, which has been a huge hit. And congratulations again.
Oh, thank you.
And we're going to be talking about your new book, which is, you've called it Wanderlust, Extraordinary People, Quirky Places, and Curious Cuisine. Not many people probably know this, but you actually asked me to pre-read it before the launch and write a blurb, which I was honored to do so. So thank you for that. As you have come on before, I urge people to watch our first interview or listen to the first interview, which can be found on my platform. So just go on, Take a Wander with Shebs, and you'll be able to find it. Now, the first question I want to ask you, actually, because you told me this in the last interview, that you're planning to write a book, but weren't too sure exactly what it's going to be on. And you hinted at it being a business-related book because you traveled a lot for business. However, reading this book, you've gone down the travel route again. So what changed your mind from when you last spoke to me during our interview to writing this book, which is all about travel?
After the first book came out, and I honestly had thought that I was going to write a business book, and I had started writing. People were reading this and telling me they loved the book. And I was getting so much positive feedback and so many people saying to me, well, you started to tell about this. Could you tell more stories about food? People were really interested in food stories. I said, oh, yeah, I got a lot of good food stories. And then they said, and you've been to some of the more remote places on the earth. I want to hear about places that I'm never going to go to. And I started thinking about it, and I made a list of what stories I could tell that I didn't tell in the first book. And the list was so long, I have enough material for 3 or 4 books. And in fact, I'm working on the third book, which is going to be a little bit different. But there was no question in my mind that I had plenty of stories. And then I found this quote, and I thought, and which starts the book. It is so accurate, and I'm sure you agree with this one. It's by Ibn Battuta, and it is traveling. It leaves you speechless, then it turns you into a storyteller. And that's about the sum of it. And I said, well, the business book will just wait. There's lots of people writing business books. And unfortunately, while lots of people write travel books, they vary in quality, shall we say. Read a lot of them. And some of them are somewhat less wonderful than the others. And I think I can write a good book. So.
What are the differences, would you say, for people who were to pick this book up and say, what are the differences that they may find compared to your first book? Because your first book was, when I read it, was a form of a biography telling everybody what you did over the years and maybe highlights of your travel history. This goes into more detail, that I would say, from when I was reading it, and specifics. Would that be the overriding difference between the books, or what would you say in your own words?
The first book I would have described as travel memoir. It's a memoir told through travel stories, but it is a memoir. This is not. This is pure travel stories. And you will not understand my life, but you will get a lot of great travel stories, which I think may even appeal to a broader group of people, just because, there are people who don't like memoirs. But it is pure travel. And, what's wonderful about it, and some things that are, sometimes perplexing, or issues, or how do you deal with this? But not in a prescriptive way, just here's what can happen when you travel.
You decided to write it chronologically because you start from New York and then go all the way down to talk about New York again during the pandemic times. What made you decide to go down that route instead of picking maybe the highlights, and it could have been scattered from different times and different eras? Was it, again, deliberate what you did? And I'm sure there are more stories you could have written into it, but what was the reasoning behind those stories that you picked for people to read?
Well, at one point, I was going to do a whole section on people, a whole section on places, and a whole section on food. And what I realized is that my observations changed over time, and that if I didn't factor time into it, it was not going to make as much sense. So, and some of them, there's no story that's exclusively one thing. There are stories about food that include all kinds of other things about the culture. There are stories about people that include things about the place. One of the examples is a story about going to the Devil's Monument, the Devil's Tower out in Wyoming. And it's really about people, but it's also about the place. And so where do I put it? Do I put it for people? Do I put it for the place? And I eventually decided that just having it chronological was the easiest way to do it. And from what I know from people who've read the book, is a lot of people don't read it in order anyhow. They go, "Oh, I've been there. I want to read about that." Or, "Oh, I haven't been there. I want to read about that." So it almost didn't matter how I did.
There are chapters in there that really, really you get pulled into. And there was one chapter you wrote in your book about, because I could have chosen quite a lot of these, but Morocco in the 1990s, late 1990s, I think, 1999 to be precise. And you met a guy called Rob in Fez. Reading that for me was a powerful chapter in the entire book, because there is because nothing is certain. And I've just come back from Greece, and there was a quote that I saw on a wall, and it said, "Live for today, tomorrow may never come." What was it like for you to rewrite that or relive that and write that?
I was there to go to a sacred music festival. And the very first day, I met this guy, Rob, who was the most middle America white bread person you could ever imagine, with blonde hair. And but we started talking, and I immediately became fascinated by him, because his appearance and who he was had nothing to do with each other. He was somebody who was searching, and he had tried a lot of different religions, and he had somehow decided that he was going to be a Muslim, which seemed unlikely, particularly because he was gay. And that was very obvious. And he exuded it, and he attracted every guy there. I've never seen anything quite like it. And I know a lot of gay people, I have a lot of friends, and I have never seen anything like it. He had this magnetism. And he started, after a while, I didn't see him. Turns out he was a writer, and he had brought his editor along. And I got friendly with his editor, and I learned more about Rob. And then I would talk more with Rob. And his story kept evolving. He eventually went off with the pool boy from the hotel and was living with him. And this all happened within the course of less than 2 weeks. And we developed a friendship. And then I will not tell what happens at the end of the story. But I became really fascinated with him. I don't usually become interested in Americans when I'm in foreign countries. I can see them in the US. But he was such an anomaly, because he was clearly on a search. And his search was taking him to places that he didn't anticipate. He was saying it was a religious search, but that's not what it was.
That comes in, by the way, your book about people, where you meet specific people or individuals, and they can change your life, or you'll change your perspective in life. And you mentioned something there that you potentially aren't fascinated with Americans abroad, because you can get them whilst you're in America. Similar to my mindset, actually, when I travel, I'm not particularly interested in meeting too many Brits, because I can find them here. But when you do, and they stand out from the crowd, you think, I just have to know this person. And
absolutely,
it's one of those situations where, reading that chapter, I just felt, I myself thought to myself, wow, there are moments like that where you just have to live for today. And obviously you do plan out things in life, but nothing is for sure. And you can't, and the one thing I've learned over time, and again, reading that chapter, is you can't be disappointed in life. A certain part of your chapters where you talked a lot about America as well. And within those chapters, you said that you've always wanted to travel parts of America that you had never traveled to. And we'll come on to some of your other bits of travels, and especially there was one about China, which I'm quite interested to ask you about, actually. Why did you feel as though writing about the American side of your travels was important for people to read?
Well, it's part of the world, big part of the world. And a lot of Americans have not seen the corners of America. There's a lot of places in America that Americans don't even know about, much less have seen. And I had decided that I had done so much international traveling, and I had done a lot of traveling in the US, but to major cities. And for my 50th birthday, I said, I'm taking a year off and I'm going to just drive around the US and Canada and go see all these places that you have to really want to see to go to, because they're miles and miles from anywhere. They're hard to get to. And you have to have a real sense of adventure to go to them because they're so far off the beaten path. And the other piece of it for me is that within the US, there's such diversity of places and people that they could be other countries. You know, the Pennsylvania Dutch, who are, you know, the Amish, that's a whole different world. I didn't even write about it in this, although I have some good stories. You know, you go to Monument Valley, it's totally different. The Native Americans are there, and I do write a story about the Native Americans, and it's a very different culture. It's a different way of being. It's a different way of seeing. And I thought, yeah, I want to include that as well because I have a great appreciation of the United States. And why shouldn't people read about it?
That whole section of when you talk about America, you could probably write an entire book on your travels within America. Is there any urge to write an American travel story?
I actually wrote a whole book. And this was back right after I took my 50th birthday trip. I'd written the entire book. I had gotten an agent, which took forever, but I was working full time. And the agent loved the book. And then I had a signed contract with the literary agency, which is a very good one. He took off and took another job. And I got transferred to a different literary agent who hated travel books. That was not exactly a match made in heaven. And I decided I'm working. I just don't have time to go through this whole process again. So I shelved it. And I could dust it off and rewrite it. I would rewrite it very differently now. But it didn't, somehow an international book was just where my head was at. But I could easily write a book about stories from the US because I have a lot of them. 20 years ago, the country was not as divided politically on issues, culturally, as it is now. And if I were going to write a book, I think my emphasis would be on showing that Americans have more in common than we have apart. Because even if you took the Amish communities and the Native American communities and the Hispanic communities that I visited and that I've spent time in, you'd still find that everybody has a lot of similarities. And so I think I would write it differently.
Now, I want to go on to another section where you talked about China. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I myself have been to China, and you went to a place called Xi'an. And Xi'an is is well known for the terracotta warriors. And I absolutely love the terracotta warriors. They say it's the unofficial eighth wonder of the world. And it was only discovered back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Now, China as a country is very, very, I found it fascinating. No matter what's going on politically, it's just a country that I feel as though everyone has to go there. And each province, each place that you go to is very different. Is that a country, when you went there, did it strike you? Was it striking to you straight away? And has it left you thinking you want to go explore more of China?
I've been there twice, and I would love to go back. I think at the moment, it's not in the cards for a number of reasons. What I found fascinating about was, again, the diversity of it, as you alluded to. It is a huge country. I only got to see relatively, although I've been there in total almost 2 months, I still only saw very small pieces of it. And it's like trying to see the U.S. in 2 months. Good luck. But it's a fascinating place. It's got such an unusual culture that is changing so fast. Between my first trip and my second trip, which was maybe 8 years apart, 10 years apart, maybe. I think it was about 8 years apart. It had changed dramatically, really dramatically. Because when I went to the same places, I was actually in Xi'an twice, and it was like a different city. The first time I was there, it was very dark. It was hard to see anything at night. If you went out, you brought a flashlight with you because it was that dark. There were no malls up yet at all. You went to see the terracotta warriors, but apart from that, and I went into neighborhoods because I find that interesting, but they were not saying there was anything else to see in Xi'an. And second time I went, it was like, oh my God, this is a whole different city. They have big botanical gardens, and they've got this and they've got that, and there are malls everywhere, and it's quite prosperous now. And that was in the space of 7 or 8 years, which to me says if I go back, I'm going to find a totally different place again.
The food in Xi'an is unbelievable. I remember trying the food, just the street food, and you were only talking like 80 cents, maybe $1.10. And it was so fresh. I remember trying the ramen. And you talk about the food. It is exquisite compared to anywhere. I would go back to China and the city of Xi'an. It's been a few years since I last went. Nearly 5, 6 years since I last went. But I am certain it will be completely different to what I saw a few years back. And when I went as well, I don't know whether it was there at that time prominent, but there was a Muslim section where it was very common that I think they called it the Muslim Quarter, or I can't remember the exact name, but and you go there, and again it was striking to me because you'd never seen. I wouldn't thought there was a section like that within a part of China that is like that, and they're open, and you see the women in headscarves, hijabs, and stuff, and it was really, it took me aback. I was like, wow, this is. And you hear stories about China, and I don't want to go into details of that. And you think, okay, look at that. There are people out here who are living freely and able to have whatever religion that they want, and it was great to see. Did you see that when you were there, or did you not see that?
I knew about it. I did not go and spend time there. I only had a few days, and that was it just fell off the radar, so to speak. But it's one of those things that I absolutely will go do. But the thing that struck me, as I say, was this. I mean, I know China's been modernizing at this unbelievable rate. And to see for myself what a small period of time would do was really the thing that astounded. It was, that's not what I wrote about, interestingly enough. I wrote about the food and spending time in a village near Xi'an, but it was a whole different city.
What was a challenging aspect of writing this book? Either keeping a chapter or keeping a story in there? How did you decide on what was kept in and what was kept out?
I had about 8 other chapters, and my publisher said, it's too long. You have to shorten it. So it's like, oh God, now what do I take out? And what I decided was that if it really wasn't about a person, a place, or a thing, but was about an experience I had, or didn't have that emphasis, that it was going to go. So I have, 8 chapters for a new book.
I said earlier on there was a chapter in there that really resonated, really, really got me. And I didn't actually ask you what chapter, whilst you were writing, took you back, the memories were flooding, and you felt as though you were actually living in that moment again.
funnily enough, it's probably not one that's going to resonate with other people, but I loved it because it brought me back to my childhood and to which was going to Vienna and eating strudel. Basis behind this was that my grandmother was possibly the world's worst cook, you know, and she used to make something she called strudel that had about as much resemblance to strudel as this does to the finest wine on the globe. It was just terrible. And she would make this stuff that was inedible. And if you didn't eat it within 5 minutes of it coming out of the oven, you'd break your teeth on it. And it was just, and I go to Vienna and a lot of other things go on. And we go into a pastry shop, you know, for which they are well known and well deservedly known. And the waiter says, you know, like, you know, our specialty is apple strudel. And I'm thinking to myself, no. But he insists that this is, you know, so fine. I order apple strudel. I take one bite into it and I went, oh my God, now I know why people like strudel. It was revelatory. Truly, it changed my whole world to learn that this was something that I thought of as being one thing. And in truth, it was something completely different. That really brought me back both to my grandmother, who I adored, but who was a horrible cook, and to that experience, that moment of looking at, first of all, which looked nothing like what hers looked like, and then tasting. And I was really in the moment.
Your grandma wasn't as bad as you may be saying, and
she was. She really was. Trust me, she was a horrible cook.
Did she admit it that she was a horrible cook?
Oh no. But you could ask any one of my relatives and they'll tell you how bad she was.
Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you about the period of when you were in New York during the pandemic, and you talked about you've lived in New York and you'd seen parts of New York that you'd never had done. Right in that chapter, again, although towards the end of, I remember reading it, you sort of waiting to explore your next city or your next country, but what was it like? What was it like living through that? Well, for people listening, and what was it like writing that chapter and going back to times where it was actually a dark period in our? When you think about it, it wasn't that long ago. It was a dark period in our life.
New York was really the epicenter in the U.S., and where I live is 3 blocks from a hospital. And it's on the main way to get to 2 other major hospitals. So I was hearing sirens 3 or 4 times an hour, 24/7. It was a very scary time. And so for about 4 or 5 months, other than walking my dog, I barely went out because it was that bad. And I knew several people who died, and it was awful. But once we were all wearing masks and things felt marginally safer, I decided I was going to look at New York as if I were a tourist to New York. Despite the fact that I grew up in Manhattan, I've lived other places, but I've mostly lived in and around Manhattan for the vast majority of my life. And I started discovering all kinds of things and developed a new passion in life, which is street art, which I became. New York, turns out, and I honestly did not know this, is considered one of the best cities on the globe for street art, and I now understand why. And I was going into neighborhoods that I maybe heard the name but had never been in to go look at street art. And so off I went. And then I said, gee, and I like parks, and maybe there won't be so many people around if I don't go to Central Park or any of the other major parks. And I discovered there's something like 800 parks in and around New York City. So I started going to off the beaten path parks, some of which were spectacular, with views of the city that just blew me away. And I just kind of widened it, because at that point there were no museums open. You couldn't go to the theater. You couldn't go anything indoors. So I was trying to figure out ways to see the city from different perspectives that were outdoors. And it is incredible what I found out. And then, as you say, as things loosened up a little bit, I started taking trips. First close in for a few days, and then for a week or two, going to places that I either liked a lot or I had never been to that were within reasonable driving distance. And that turned out to be equally interesting because, again, somehow we always think we have to go far away to discover something new, and you don't. That was literally the longest time I'd been without traveling since I was 17.
The story emphasized that you can have a journey in your backyard, and that's something that, again, it resonated with me because I discovered my hometown when the pandemic came, and it was a fantastic chapter to sort of get people thinking, well, you know what, you don't necessarily have to leave the country to find the world, and change your perspective in life as well. When people read this second book, what would you want them to take away from it compared to what they took away from the first book?
My mission in life is to get as many people to travel as possible. And I was a little bit on that mission with the first book. Now I'm really on it. I want to convince people that it's one of the greatest things you can do. And, you can buy lots of things, but you can't buy experiences the way you will have. The things will go away, the experiences don't. And having been on a lot of podcasts and chats and all kinds of publicity for the first book and now for the second book, when I've had live events, I've always, every time there's a Q&A, someone will get on and say, I loved your book, but I really don't know how to get started. This is a way to ease people into it. And I want people to understand that the world is just a fabulous place. It's not a scary, dangerous place. And no matter what you've heard, there are going to be wonderful people who are going to help you and take you in and be friendly. And that's the message I want to get out. And I really want to encourage people to travel.
Karen, we've come to the end of our talk. I can talk to you more and more about the book, but it's but it's a fascinating book. I absolutely loved reading it. And anyone who hasn't read the first book, as I said to you, the first book is called Travel Mania: Stories of Wanderlust. Get that book, and then read the second book, which is called Wanderlust: Extraordinary People, Quirky Places, and Curious Cuisine, and it comes out on 3rd of October.
Correct.
And you can get it on Amazon and all good bookstores. Karen, before I let you go, just tell people where they can find you on your socials.
My website is easy. It's KarenGershowitz.com. And you can even find out where to buy the books on the website. And I'm updating it with more photographs, but it has all of the basics about the new book, as well as the first book, including photographs that go with every chapter in the book. So you can see what I was seeing as I was traveling to these places. And it will be the same for Wanderlust. I am on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. Look for my name. You will find me.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh.
I really am honored that you actually told me to write the book. Well, read the book and write a blurb. And it was an honor. So thank you so much. I look forward to your next book, bringing you back on and discussing it. So thank you so much. And I'll speak to you very soon.
Thanks so much, Shebs. It was great talking with you.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button to never miss an episode, and watch all my previous episodes from the show. You can also follow me on all my social media platforms. That's it for Take a Wander with Shebs. Hope to see you all soon. Until next time, bye for now.